What happens when ambition stops mattering? Not because you failed, not because you're depressed, not because you gave up, but because something inside of you fundamentally changed. What happens when validation no longer feeds you? When success starts feeling hollow? When attention, hustle, performance, and proving yourself suddenly feel exhausting instead of fulfilling? What happens when you stop needing the world to constantly confirm your existence? Tonight we're talking about psychological rebirth. Carl Jung called it individuation, mystics called it awakening, ancient traditions called it wisdom. But there's another archetype that sits at the center of all of it, Sophia, wisdom embodied. Not fake enlightenment, not spiritual superiority, not posting healing quotes while emotionally avoiding accountability in real life. Humanity loves that one. Nothing says I'm healed like trauma dumping on Instagram while treating people terribly in private. Real wisdom costs something. It costs identities, illusions, comfort, relationships, versions of yourself that can no longer survive once you truly wake up. And if you've been feeling disconnected lately, if you've been questioning everything, if you've started realizing you no longer fit into the same conversations, motivations, or environments, this episode may explain why. There comes a moment in psychological development when ambition falls silent, not through defeat, not through exhaustion, through transformation. Jung described different stages of psychological development, but Sophia represented something different entirely. Not innocence, not romance, not devotion, wisdom, integrated awareness, and Sophia consciousness is not about becoming better than people. It's about becoming honest enough to stop lying to yourself. That's the real initiation. Most people are not lacking intelligence, they're lacking self-awareness. They spend years blaming, projecting, performing, numbing, consuming, distracting, and avoiding and chasing validation. Anything except sitting quietly with themselves long enough to ask, who am I underneath all of this? And eventually, life strips the masks away anyway, not to punish you, to return you to yourself. One of the first signs of transformation is the death of the hero impulse. In the beginning of life, we need the ego, we need ambition, recognition, achievement, identity, we need to matter. And there's nothing wrong with that. The ego isn't evil, it's developmental. You cannot transcend a self that was never built. But eventually, something changes. You stop needing to be the hero in every story. You stop needing applause, validation, constant proof. And honestly, this scares people because society worships performance. People don't know what to do with someone who no longer needs approval to feel real. When you stop performing your pain, people call you cold. When you stop proving yourself, people assume you became lazy. But what actually happened is deeper than that. You stopped outsourcing your identity. You stopped needing everyone else to tell you who you are. And let's be honest for a second, a lot of people are not addicted to love. They're addicted to significance. They need to feel chosen because internally they don't choose themselves. They need to feel desired because internally they feel invisible. That's why some people stay trapped in toxic relationships, not because the relationship is healthy, but because the chaos gives them identity. Without the drama, they don't know who they are. That isn't love. That's dependency disguised as meaning. Sophia consciousness also creates a shift from information to wisdom. And there's a difference. We live in a culture drowning in information but starving for wisdom. People consume podcasts, therapy language, psychology reels, self-help books, spiritual content, and still remain deeply unconscious. Because information alone does not transform you. Application does, embodiment does, radical honesty does. You can memorize attachment theory and still avoid accountability. You can quote Jung and still manipulate people emotionally. You can talk about healing while remaining deeply committed to victimhood. That's the part people don't want to hear. Eventually, you stop obsessively collecting answers. You start listening instead, listening to your body, your intuition, patterns, behavior, silence. Because behavior tells the truth long before words do. And at this stage, you begin noticing how much noise people create to avoid themselves. Constant stimulation, constant talking, constant reacting, constant posting, because stillness forces people to meet themselves. And most people do not actually want self-awareness, they want comfort. One of the deepest changes that happens during awakening is emotional disidentification. You stop drowning in every emotional storm. Now let me be clear, this is not numbness. This is not becoming heartless. This is nervous system maturity. Someone insults you, you notice it, but you no longer collapse from it. If someone betrays you, it hurts, but it no longer destroys your identity. You begin understanding that someone else's behavior is information, not always an instruction for your self-destruction. That changes everything. Emotionally immature people often expect access to your nervous system. They expect guilt to control you, shame to control you, chaos to control you. And once you stop reacting the way you used to, they become uncomfortable, not because you became cruel and because you became harder to manipulate. Healing is not becoming endlessly tolerant. Healing is learning where you end and another person begins. Now let's talk about shadow work, the part everybody claims they want until it's time to actually confront themselves. Most people project their disowned darkness onto others. That's why everybody online suddenly thinks every ex is a narcissist. Projection protects identity, because it's easier to call somebody toxic than ask, how did I participate in this dynamic? Now, participation is not the same thing as blame. Someone can absolutely hurt you, abuse you, manipulate you, but healing requires deeper questions. Why did I ignore the red flags? Why did chaos feel familiar? Why did I abandon my own boundaries? Why did I confuse intensity with intimacy? Why did I stay? That's shadow work, and shadow work is brutal because it destroys innocence. You realize you are not only the wounded child, you are also capable of manipulation, avoidance, control, projection, emotional immaturity. Everybody is. And once you truly face your shadow, you stop being shocked by humanity. Not because you excuse harmful behavior, but because you finally understand human beings are driven by wounds they often refuse to confront. Another sign of mature consciousness is the ability to hold paradox. Someone can love you and still hurt you. A parent can try their best and still traumatize you. You can deeply love someone and still need to leave them. This is where black and white thinking dies. And honestly, many people stay stuck because they desperately need simple villains. But healing requires complexity, because mature consciousness stops asking, who's the bad guy? And starts asking, what truth am I avoiding? At some point, you also stop forcing life. You stop trying to dominate every outcome through fear and control. And this is especially difficult for trauma survivors because trauma creates hypervigilance. You think, if I control everything, maybe I'll finally feel safe. But eventually you realize control is exhausting, and often the tighter you grip life, the more disconnected you become from it. Sophia consciousness teaches alignment instead of force, not passivity, not weakness, alignment like water flowing around obstacles instead of trying to destroy everything in its path. And ironically, life often starts opening once you stop desperately trying to force every door. Something else begins happening too. You start seeing consciousness everywhere. Nature feels alive, silence feels alive, presence feels alive. You become more intentional, more reverent, more aware, because once you truly sense the sacredness of existence, carelessness becomes difficult, and this is why awakened people often become quieter. Not because they think they're better than others, because they finally learned how to listen, and after all the healing, all the shadow work, all the breakdowns, all the identity collapses, you return to simplicity. A peaceful morning, a meaningful conversation, a walk, stillness, presence. You stop needing excess because eventually you realize more things never healed emptiness. More validation never healed abandonment. More attention never healed self-worth. And this is true freedom when you no longer need the world to constantly feed your identity. Now let's talk honestly about something nobody discusses enough. Awakening is lonely, not because you're superior, but because awareness changes your relationship to life. You stop fitting into certain conversations, certain environments, certain performances. People feel that shift. Some will think you changed negatively, but what actually happened is you stopped pretending. And Jung warned about something extremely important here, spiritual inflation. The moment you think awakening makes you better than other people, you've already fallen asleep again. Real wisdom creates humility because the deeper you go, the more mystery you discover. The goal is not perfection. The goal is wholeness. To become someone capable of loving without possession, holding boundaries without hatred, seeing clearly without cruelty, speaking truth without ego, healing without superiority. That's the work, and maybe that's why you're here. Maybe life has been dismantling you because the version of you built from survival was never meant to be your final form. Maybe the loneliness, the questioning, the collapse weren't punishment. Maybe they were initiation, and if that's true, your responsibility now is not to return to sleep, it's to return to yourself. If this episode resonated with you, follow Facing the Mirror on Spotify. You can also work with me directly through Healing My Feelings. And remember, healing is not becoming someone else. It's finally becoming honest about who you already are. Until next time, face the mirror.